Hello, so this is going to be my companion video to my post about building model systems. Uh, I presume you have checked the article, so I won't get into much details there. I just want to illustrate some things that are better explained by voice than in writing. Um, so one thing with the model systems, like I have built a lot of model systems in the last 10, 15 years. One good example of a system like this is the Product Hunt ones. Because, for example, in Product Hunt, you can go to here, pick a post, click it, and you notice like the URL changes. And if I copy this URL and I paste it, I get the same page. And this is handled with Next.js, and Next.js technically didn't support this before. The other nice thing here is I can click here. This opens another model which has totally different style than the previous one. Like if you notice, the previous one was in a white frame, this is in a dark frame. Now I close this, it's behind that. I keep a lot of the situations there. So implementing a mobile model system is very complex in general. So big part of the article was exactly like the separation of like, we built the model system is something that most developers shouldn't worry about when they work on an application. They just, okay, I just need some model. I just fire open model and this is my interface. So I just open some models. And the other part is like, okay, I just need to implement my model. It has its own interface, it's type safe, and I don't care about what's in the middle, what's the big implementation. So in this way, we allow developers to quickly build new features and we can do the implementation later. Like something with the interface of just having like open model and okay, model content is whatever, is in the article I mentioned this create model thing where I fetch the data. So this thing was added later. This wasn't something that for years I never had. We added it at some point and it was backward compatible. Like a model doesn't need to use create model. It just made it easy to have a simple types of model. The same thing is with the lazy loading. It's not required, it's optional. You can just add it or not and you don't change the system. The other thing here is I have once built a system where I just had open model and I didn't have stacking because it wasn't needed. Because I didn't have stacking, a lot of options were kind of like not needed. But having this interface, the moment where the requirement of stacking came up, I just changed this implementation. So I have this cleaned up from like a working project and I'm going to kind of walk through this gist. You can check it yourself. And you can actually leave comments if you have something questions. I try to add some code comments to make it a bit more interesting. So this is again the public interface. It has quite a bit of parts. Model container is something you put in your DOM, in your virtual DOM. This is just the place that's going to render the components. The nice thing about it is because it uses the event bus, there is no context. You don't need to make the context tree. I remember once we had this issue where we had notice elements, like the bubbles that show here in the top, and the models, and a bubble should have been able to trigger a model, but back then we were using contexts and they like scrambled around and didn't work. So doesn't matter where this thing is. Create model, this is like the utility of just fetching the data, like treating the each model as like a state machine of like loading the state. The most used function, open model, like the things that opens the model. And this one, I honestly didn't use it in many projects. I only had it in, I think, 2, where there were certain UI elements that actually cared if they're like inside of a model or not. Like they change some of the way they work. So this is like the public interface. Everything else is kind of private and we don't care about it. Like the triggers, they're just simple emits. They're, again, event bus, it's like a nice implementation detail. I almost never use event bus directly like this, like just emitting events, even though they're type safe, like you have autocomplete and everything. It's actually nicer just to have this nice interface here and just know, okay, this is my options. And because it's very easy, you can extend this in the future. Like the whole system is kind of organically built to be extended over time, like adding and removing features. Like recently in a project, I removed a bunch of features here because they were not used. Like they didn't use to replace anywhere, so I just removed it because we don't need the complexity. But also you can add stuff here. Like, for example, you can add unloaded callback or stuff like that. So this is kind of the triggers. Let's go the less complex, this simple context, which is inside a model provider, basically tells you like if you are inside of a model or not. It's like the most simple hook ever. It's just always returns true or false if it's out of that tree. Nothing special here. And again, the create model. It's very wireframey here because a lot of the logic here depends project to project. Like if something changes project to project, that's this. Because how we fetch data is almost different. The nice thing here is there is a lot of TypeScript magic to kind of make it type safe. Like you pass the type, you pass the prop type, and it kind of knows how it fetches the data. And again, it has this nice state machine, like how often, if we just had a hook, we're going to handle errors. Almost never, we almost forget about them. Also, having this loading indicator is very useful because if we lazy load with Next.js dynamic the model and then we load the data, we don't do any jumps, like we can use the same spinner. Here is some really nice small hack about how to do like titles. It uses this key magic here to refresh it. Here, for example, in a lot of projects, I also put the UI frames. Like for example, the create dialog. I don't need to. For example, in Radix UI, you have like the frame of the model, like the header, the footer, and whatever. You don't need it. I can just put it here if I need it. I can here have also the close button. Like you can imagine how this creating can be just something like this, having like the close button here, maybe have like some title here by default given by the create screen, and then the component can be this let's say green part here. Like you can make this create model have that, and this is very application specific. I'm just showing some code here, and the most bigger file, like it's, oh my god, it's 255 lines even with comments, is this container. Like this is our root. This is the big thing we are having. So the root here is this is like the model container. It's basically two components just because we cannot do conditional hooks. Like if we had conditional hooks, I will just remove this part here and just okay, give me the current model. If it doesn't exist, return no, so we don't care. If it exists, just do a scroll lock. Scroll lock make sure like the background doesn't scroll. We use the scroll position of the model, so we position this thing here to be positioned whenever the model is, and then when the user click escape, we just go close model. And notice like there is 0 closures here, so actually this is quite nice on like garbage collection. Like we don't generate a lot of functions with a lot of closures in this code. This is like a meta thing you might notice in the design here, because this is kind of like a core system and it's very used, so micro optimizations here actually are very compounding. Again, this is the inside the model container. Here in the real app, you're going to have like the overlay design. You don't, this data model true is something that, because I still need the DOM interactions. In some projects, if you use the HTML5, the HTML dialog component, a lot of the stuff is handled by it, like the scrolling of the parents, so you can do some nice things here. The model itself, the model state copies a lot of option state, like the content, the close handler, the path, but it also keeps some state for itself, which is like, okay, what was the URL that was before I was opened, and what's the scrolling top position I should go when I come back. And most of the complexity here is hidden in hooks. This is something I really like to do, is when I have components that need some logic, just to hide a lot of that complexity in the hooks. And often the hooks are easier to unit test, because you only test like the input and the output. You don't go with the whole JSX translation layer. So the use model state is a very complex, like it's a very long hook, and it uses a lot of like memory tricks. For its core, it just has an array of models used in the use state. You just have this array. We have a couple of event handlers, which are open, close, and handle URL change. Those handlers here, I use one memo, because I don't want every time the model function re-renders to do anything. So here I use memo. I use this really nice trick with use memo, where when I have multiple click handlers, I just do one use memo and I store all of them. And here I also re-evaluate this use memo with set models, because that's the only thing I actually need here, which is not like a static thing. Another thing we can do is sometimes I use ref and just keep a hold of those, but in this case I think use memo is more useful. And the open one, again, the open function just takes the model, it gets the current URL from the DOM, sets the scroll position to 0 because we don't scroll it, and here we can, and then again we check if there is like a URL change. We can directly manipulate the window history. And this works well with even Next.js applications, because this bypasses the Next.js routing system. So we tell the Next.js routing system don't know about this change here, and we can just work around it. And then we use set models. We use this thing where the hook can actually get its argument. And here we check, should we replace or should we add new state? And if we replace, okay, we don't care about the old one. If we don't replace, we are using this DOM manipulation to get the current scroll position, save it in this previous state. So in this way, when we close the new model, then we can come back to the scroll position. Close is just, okay, we close it, we call down close handler, and we are done. And handle URL change, what we do here is we figure out, okay, which of our current paths is the current path when the URL changes, and we just close everything on the pipeline. And yeah, we use the event bus, so we listen here, we listen for open, we listen for close. That's the only two things that can change that, and we listen on the Windows pop state. So when we pop state, we change that. And use event listener is very popular. I think every React project actually has that. I just inlined here just one of the implementations. Is current URL just again checks if the URL is current. Actually, the more correct name might be here is current path, because we honestly just care about the path. Because if the model opens like a new URL with a new domain with a new host, this totally bypasses the whole pop state situation anyways. Use event listener, as I mentioned, this is like an implementation of use event listener. Use scroll log, this is like what logs the scrolling position. What we do here is we get the ones before, we update the windows to be like display hidden, to put it at full length, and we record what was the scroll position, and we scroll to the top. And when we say hidden, sometimes we are losing the scroll position, so we have to return it when we close the model. And when the model is closed, this is when we are going to kind of like do the cleanup after the hook. The overlay click, this is again, we are using the data model. If we click something and it's outside of that, it works. It closes just the close model. And again, this function is flying. It doesn't depend on any state. It only depends on its input and just fires an event, which is really cool. And use scroll position of model is basically when we get a new model, we get the scrolling container, which is this data model thing, and we set its scroll position to the model top position. So when we close models, we have those, and here is like the key input. So basically this is the whole implementation. Like if we remove the comments, because I tried to add a lot of those, it's like around 400 lines of code. And in applications, it gets a bit bigger because of create model is a lot more logic, and there is a lot more UI. Like right now, again, I don't have any UI here, but if you imagine if you have a lot of scroll positions, buttons, patterns, this can grow quite a bit. So this is kind of the code walkthrough. If you have, again, any questions, just leave it in the comments. You can ping me. I'm always want to discuss systems like that, because those are like the most fun systems I get to work on. So yeah, thanks for your attention, and see you next week.